We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners at Burke Britton Financial Partners. This is This Week in Finances with Ben Kemp and myself, Jay Burke. Ben, how you going?
Good, Jay. How are you? Another week down?
This is very, very formal. How we record for like 5 minutes and realise that we've done our podcast before we've started the podcast.
All the good stuff's gone.
We're going to keep this one. We're going to keep it under 30 minutes. How about that? So,
it'll be tough for us. We both just ramble. So,
well, I've got an appointment, so I've got to be out of here in 25 minutes. So we'll do our best. So, last week and a half, there's been a bit of topical superannuation news. I know it's pretty boring. We talk super, but listen, when Koshy's talking about it, when old mate Carl Stefanovic's getting agitated about super.
He'd have more than three.
So would Koshy.
Yeah.
For sure. They got reason to be a little bit
men of the people,
uneasy.
Aren't they?
So we had our self-managed super fund conference, and it was obviously very topical, and I don't think it had actually come out. It wasn't released. It was spoken about. We had two...
Well, it was interesting because at the conference, I think it was the current minister...
Finance minister and
also the shadow minister both spoke. They would have definitely known where things were going, but...
Could you tell that they were politicians when they started to speak? If you
It was horrendous. Yeah, it was pretty hard listening, but I thought we've got to listen and see what their guidance is. And both of them trying to preach no changes to super, got to be really strong on that. And then it wouldn't have been a week, and we had a change.
It's funny how the rhetoric is they're almost identical in their rhetoric that, we want stable and stability around superannuation and no changes, yet they couldn't be further apart, really.
Yeah, it had my head spinning. And anyone I've spoken to, even people that are sort of not that involved in the industry, sort of just can't wrap their head around what both sides are trying to do. It's bizarre. But it's a bit of a strange time, and people try and make excessive change, don't they? Like when things are a bit up in the air and they're not too sure, people try and overcorrect, or they're just sort of going to let the system work itself out.
I think more than ever, though, in today's day and age, even the last 3 years since COVID, people are more questioning and critical, and I suppose less trusting of why governments make changes. So let's talk about what the change is. So what was proposed? So there was this insight that they would increase or introduce a new tax to super. It came out, and it was what, Ben?
So I'm just going to read direct. On the 28th of February, the government announced from 1st of July 2025, a 30% concessional tax rate will be applied to future earnings of superannuation balances above $3 million. Now,
you said that just like a politician too.
Just
so boring.
Straight into ATO mode.
What does it mean?
Well, if I said I knew the ins and outs of it, I'd be a liar. So again, I always get a bit skeptical when you've got such a long period of time until anything's implemented. I don't like to overcorrect because things will change. There'll be so much alteration to whatever that even means, that sentence. But obviously immediately people start looking at their own situation. They go, it either does or it doesn't apply to them at this point in time. So broadly, they're trying to tax people with high super balances to fund government expenditure. Everyone's going to have an opinion on that. It's more about, all right, another change to super, which I just don't like in general. So you just got to we need to let things settle and build trust in it, not alter it and then de-incentivise people growing wealth in super. So that I don't really like that. The part that's a bit strange about it is what is earnings in super? Like, what does that actually mean? Is that income? Is it capital growth? Is it realised gains and growth? Is it unrealised gains and growth? And we were just talking about that just before we jumped on. And I think both of us are a little bit confused about what they're trying to achieve.
I couldn't understand very quickly reading the Treasury example when I first heard it. If I go back one step, when it was first touted, everyone went, oh my God, new changes to super tax. This is ridiculous. The skeptic in me says that it was put out there so that everyone would think about it, but then the blow was softened by saying, hey, don't worry, it only applies to the rich people. So it's really only going to apply to the very rich, and so you've got nothing really to worry about unless you've got a super balance over $3 million, and we're really only going after the 17 people that have got balances over 100 million and the one person in Australia that's got a balance over 400 million.
Yeah, and again, don't get me wrong, those people obviously, they're in a pretty good situation. A little bit of tax isn't going to sting them too hard, but I think it's difficult to make rules against people who followed the rules at the point in time that was in front of them. And I think that's the issue, is if you go, right, well, that person would have had to have put a lot of contributions into super like decades before they had access to it. So they had a big deferred reward. You know, they probably gave up something to get to that point again. 400 million is a massive amount of money, but if you try and ignore the fact there's one person, you know, they still had to sacrifice something to get to this point. Now, if you start to bring that down lower and lower and lower, you start to just clip people that maybe they did it tough, like maybe they did sacrifice a lot to get to that position. Where do you draw the line eventually?
Yeah. Going back to why the government's doing it in the first place, I'm pretty sure we've talked about that on previous podcasts, that the government is short of a quid.
And the other side is twofold, is they want to raise some revenue, which you can understand after expenditure in the last few years, but also they want money to exit the super system is the other part of it too. So they don't want as much money being in there, being taxed as concessionally as it has been. So yeah, for some people, they've probably been too caught up in it in terms of having everything in super. They probably actually benefit from having some of it non-super as well, but it's going to be case by case when you get to that level.
Yeah, if you're running the government as a business, you've got to generate revenue. Got to try and keep expenses below revenue so that you've got a surplus. There's economic arguments that might be not the best course of action, but at the end of the day, I don't like the messing with super. That's my gut instinct, is kind of leave it alone. We have, and this probably goes nicely into the next topic that was talked about at our self-managed super fund conference, was sort of the demographic changes in Australia. So one of the stats that they threw around, which is pretty impressive, and that is that the superannuation, let me find it, as of 30th of March 2022, so this is 12 months old, Australians have 3.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, invested in superannuation assets, making us the fourth largest holder of pension and super assets in the world. So if you're the government, listen, it's been a brilliant wealth accumulation vehicle, but it's also a nice little, what do they call it, a honeypot for future revenue. It's taxed concessionally. There's always the potential to dig into that when times get a little bit tough. I think maybe the changes now aren't that significant to everyone. There's a small portion of the population, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think it was about 80,000 people in Australia might have been affected by the changes, or potentially affected by the changes in 2025. But one of the presenters at the self-managed super fund conference was a guy called,
I'm not going to leave this to you,
Simon Kuestenmacher. He's a director and co-founder at the Demographics Group. So he basically gave us the rundown on what the Australian population's looking like over the course of the next 20 years. And I think if you're the government, you kind of see this and realise that if we don't manage the flow of assets or the revenue that is generated by the assets that the Australians have, they're going to miss out on some income. So the aging of Australia is only getting started. We apparently will double our 85 plus cohort of people by 2035. That means the number of 85-year-olds will double in the next 10 years. Baby boomers make up currently 25% of the population in Australia, but they own more than half of the nation's wealth, so 53%, which is about 3.5 trillion, the equivalent to what's in superannuation at the moment.
Sounds like you're having a bit of a dig at the boomers. But I think it's pretty well known that that's where the wealth lies, but also the population lies there, which is what creates potential for a lot of issues as well, though, because just because a lot of people in that age bracket have a lot of wealth, there's also a heap of them that are going to become pretty reliant on an age pension as well, aren't there?
Correct.
So the government is a bit afraid of what that means for them from a liability point of view, just from their ability to actually fund people's pensions.
Yes. So the question, I suppose, in relation to this transfer of wealth is, I suppose, separate to the government, what should people, individuals, be doing? Both baby boomers, we're not wishing them away, but the reality is that there's going to be a massive transfer of wealth over the course of the next 2 decades. The question is, what can people individually do to make sure that that wealth transfer goes to the right people, and without sounding like the gold-digging children who are waiting to receive their parents' inheritance, what can you do as a beneficiary, a child of a baby boomer, to make sure that that flow is reasonably seamless and that there's a decent plan in place?
I suppose you've got to have a plan, but I think communication between those people is number one, isn't it? Actually be open about where they're at.
Well, how many people get to the point where they, it's their last days and the kids have zero idea what mum and dad have got, or mum and dad have expressed nothing about their wishes in terms of where they'd like their funds to go and how they'd like them distributed?
I think people are getting a little bit better, but there's still a long way to go. I think dealing with that almost generation older than that at the moment, thinking of a couple of clients that are dealing with their parents going into aged care, so they're in their sort of late 80s, early 90s. Their kids literally don't know anything because it's very private, like they didn't tell them, and then they get thrust with being the power of attorney and they're trying to find things and they got no idea. And then we end up doing a massive deep dive, which could take weeks, if not months, to actually find out what do they have and what don't they have, and then work out all the tax ramifications of that afterwards. So I think people are getting a little bit better about having do a stock take of what you've got.
Or at least put your toe in the water and start to introduce the conversation around things like, hey, and you should know, if you're the power of attorney or the executor of your parents' estate, you probably should know because you've signed something at some point. However, it might have been a long time ago. Introducing that conversation, it's not about just going from not talking about it to saying, hey, mum, dad, give me all of your information.
Gift me everything as well.
But actually starting the conversation so that you do have a little bit of insight into what your parents want. It's not only the financial aspect, it's their wishes from a lifestyle point of view as they enter their later years. All of those conversations, I think, can help. I don't think you can start those conversations too early as long as they're done in the right manner, and it makes a hell of a difference. We're trying to, like you said, catch up later is challenging.
And intergenerational wealth transfer is much different now. Like, I think historically it was just a death, whereas we're finding now a lot more people are passing either assets or control of a business or some level of assistance down the line when they're still living. So it becomes even more important to understand why, how, and the method that's gone about being applied to get that to happen in the most effective manner. So I think, again, that's probably been driven off the back of property prices and things where a lot of parents or grandparents have helped their kids, grandkids, etc., with a gift or something. But then, they gift it to one child, but they've got 6. How does that get reflected? Do you need to be doing updates? Do you need to be looping that in and making sure everyone's aware, or is it sort of a secret?
Yeah, particularly if you've got blended families. That's on one of our podcasts too, with Daniela, where we talked about blended family situations. That businesses, as soon as you've got business interests or entities that sit outside of the estate pool. One of the other things I was thinking about was, and we say it flippantly when it comes to clients, spending their kids' inheritance and, encouraging people to enjoy their wealth, which I think they absolutely should do. One of the interesting things, I'm not sure whether you recall it, that Simon touched on, is that culturally, Australians have a real preference to pass on intergenerational wealth. A lot of their planning is around, how do I actually make sure that I do leave something for my kids? Like, it's ingrained in us as the baby boomers have had that increase in their wealth. They're one of the wealthiest generations we've seen. They are wanting to actually pass on their wealth. So planning for that as early as possible, I think, is super important.
Yeah,
Pardon the pun.
It has been. It's interesting when every client is a little bit different, but generally speaking, they want to make sure something is left.
Yeah.
And even sometimes they're too conscious of that too. It's a balancing act when you're advising the parent to make sure that they're not compromising their lifestyle, their retirement to benefit their kids too much. They want to be able to give them assistance where possible, but not compromise their own standard of living.
Yeah, but you also don't want them operating outside of what they're comfortable with. Like encouraging people to spend money that they don't really want to spend just to spend it because you think that that's what they should do. Ultimately, people need to be comfortable in the lifestyle that they're living. And once you work that out, and whenever we do have the involvement of kids, and I've had a couple of these conversations of recent time where we've had kids or powers of attorney or executors or future executors come into appointments, our primary concern is the client. Our primary concern, our number one concern is not about what the kids will get. It's first and foremost, while our clients are here, how do we make sure that their best interests are looked after? Once we've done that, how do we then wrap that up so that there's a clean succession if and when something is to occur, that it happens in line with their wishes? And again, that planning I don't think can start early enough.
You've got to talk about it a lot because often it takes time to alter it to be effective. Like you don't just come in and bang, yeah, that's all sorted. Like a beneficiary nomination doesn't really do much at all. Like it obviously is a massive thing, but it doesn't change all the other consequences that flow off the back of that. So it can often take us. Sometimes we have plans that are 8 to 10 years long in terms of where they are now to in 10 years' time we'll be finished that estate planning, mould.
That sounds outrageous for people who hear that. They think, what do you mean? A plan that takes 8 years to unwind?
And that's probably at the top end of it, but it depends.
Yeah, when you start to think about, and this is, again, another whole podcast, but you think about managing tax implications of superannuation and the ability to get it out or get it back in, takes time. We're limited by contribution caps and the like, but I suppose if we could say anything to those listening out there, it is, doesn't matter whether your parents are in good health or not, you should be having a conversation both ways. Your kids with their parents and parents with their kids about what they want the future of their financial and lifestyle situation to look like. If you can open those lines of communication early, it makes it better for everyone in the long run.
Agreed.
Anything else, Ben? You talked. We are going pretty quick.
So what are we up to? How long have we been?
Probably only 20 minutes. So, did you want to hit up your last topic around travel?
We might as well. We might talk about this a bit. I think maybe it could be a long form conversation in the future, but it's probably maybe I'm biased because I've sort of very briefly dabbled in this. But there's a lot of people who are just packing up and doing that 12 months on the road thing. Like they're just going, all right, a caravan, car, take the kids out of school. And I know you've probably toyed with it, and we know
the Mercedes-Benz Unimog.
I don't know how you go, but you have plenty of people to help you change a tyre anyway. So I think it's just reading articles about it, and I know people, friends and clients, and it seems to be coming back into vogue for younger people. It was almost seen as just like the grey nomad journey, doing those things. But a lot of people now sort of, and I don't know, it's just a change in our mindset through working life going, sometimes you've got to stop and just take that break, reset, and then go back and do it all again. But it seems to be growing. I don't know if that's just me being biased towards it, probably following too many different forums around it. But do you think there's a push to that?
Well, there definitely. I've felt the push. I've had friends that have picked up and gone for 12 months with families of 4 and not more. I think 4's the maximum. So I'd be probably the most that I know of. Although I follow a couple of people online that have travelled with kids. But I've seen people do it well, and I've seen people do it poorly. I've seen people do it well and get their shit together before they go. So when they come back, they haven't spent every last cent they've got. I've seen ones that have sold up everything, not worrying and thinking, I'll worry about it when I get back. Maybe that's back to our transfer of wealth. Maybe too many people are thinking about the inheritance they're likely to receive from their parents, and they think, stuff it, I'm going to get some money from mum and dad, so I'll just roll with spending all my money now to get around Australia. But
they won't often tell you that, though, or verbalise that.
No.
But there's a hell of a lot of people that are thinking it.
Yeah, we all bank on that windfall. I think all of us to some degree have in our mind that thought, and probably rightly so, about what's going to happen. But altering your whole life based upon that.
Carrying additional risk. Like you
Yeah,
take
but-
on a massive amount of risk, I think. Whenever I hear of the people who are selling their home
To do it.
it's a bit of a trigger for me to get a bit anxious for them.
Yeah.
Because just you lose that base. And I know, again, it really depends on everyone's situation and their financials and what they're planning to do in the future. But if you can at least maintain that asset of a home to come back to, it's going to give you some point of stability to then to re-establish yourself, and whether that's to work near there or something, you've got an asset to work around.
It's another example of where planning can be really important. Like financial planning for people preparing to do a trip or take some time off. It's one of the best times to plan, to actually get in and say, okay, what is it going to look like? What is it going to cost us? What am I going to do for income? What do we do when we get back? How do we protect ourselves during that period of time? You and I probably couldn't be more supportive of people in doing it. I mean, financial planning isn't financial planning. It's lifestyle planning. We definitely should be living our life, but you've got to do it with, I think you've got to do it with at least a partial financial lens.
Yeah, a bit like everything we do.
Yeah.
Like there's always has to be that. There has to be some consideration towards the financial implications of it, which, again, that sounds the boring side of it. But we want people to be able to travel and do it without having to even think about their budget when they're on the road. Like set up, know what they've got, be able to do the things they're planned to do. Again, sometimes it's hard for us, I think, when we have to tell people that's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
And no one really likes to hear that, but there's times where we have to do it. Most of the time, if we've established it and talked about it over a period of time, we can get the building blocks in place and it will be okay. Sometimes people just have an irrational idea of what their wealth or their current position will do for them as well. And I've had people, and it's a little bit different, but people in their, say, early 60s go, I've had enough. Like, I don't want to work anymore. But they haven't done anything prior to that thought to actually allow them to do it. And they think, I've got a couple $100,000 in super. It's not going to last long. Like, that's not going to be enough. And sometimes there's the younger people who have still got a mortgage, but they've saved up a bit and they think they'll probably be able to just sort of patch it over. Maybe they can, but it'd be good to run some numbers on it first.
Yeah. Acting without thinking or acting without planning. Again, I'm trying to think of examples where it works. Like in some instances it does work. I get it. Like that sometimes you'll have an instinct or an inclination to do something you do and it works out beautifully.
But that's more like we talked about this about cash flow and the diet. Like there'd be some subconscious part of you who made that decision without having to consciously think about it.
Yeah, so if you're in good habits, so if you've
That's
that's
what I
what I mean.
mean.
If you've
Yeah,
developed
like
good habits, then making a reactive decision, which seems reactive,
It's actually not.
yeah. It's funny. When I'm an avid listener to Jocko and his principles, he talks about iterative decision making. He said that from the outside, it appears that he makes fairly brash, decisive decisions, big decisions. He said he doesn't. He makes really small incremental decisions. So he's always just making decisions all the time. So he's making decisions about his financial situation, which put him in a better place when it comes to making a bigger decision. He feels comfortable. Like you said, it's kind of intuition. It's instinctively he knows that he's done the work beforehand. He's prepared and he can make that reasonably larger decision. Like the worst, I couldn't imagine travelling, like taking 12 months off, travelling around Australia and thinking every day, oh my God, I can't afford to do this. What the hell are we going to do when we get home? We don't want that.
No. And that's the key thing is then you end up being dragged back into that money mindset when you should be just free of that. Like if you've got it established well enough, you loosely know, we're not going to go out for dinner every night we're away. Like you're traveling around, you're probably going to, you work all these little things out and you do a budget on it and you know loosely what it's going to cost and always be a little bit conservative with it. Like you'll be fine. People have no idea what those things cost either though. Like if you don't even have a look ahead and work out roughly what's it going to cost per night for a site or, food or fuel, and do all those things. As boring as is, you got to do, you have your own household budget, you got to sort of do your holiday budget and know what that's going to cost.
That all sounds like hard work though, Ben. That sounds like having to have like daily discipline and do a little bit of work rather than just go and live fancy free.
I think a good week of planning would probably set you up for a whole year away, nearly. Yeah. As simple as that.
You touched on our budgeting podcast a couple of weeks ago. We said it actually doesn't take that long. Like these things actually don't take that long. Most of the things we think about take longer in our head than they do to actually act. Like to do a little mini budget and work out what a trip's going to cost, or actually just have a look.
Just go on a forum. Like you go on a Facebook group or whatever it is. There's literally hundreds of people doing the same thing. And I see it all the time on there, still following them, that people go, got this is a vehicle, van, this is how many kids we've got. What do you reckon it will cost us a week? And you'll get people giving you ballpark on what they've been doing. And, there'll be a bit of range because everyone spends a bit differently and eats a bit differently and has different habits. But you'll get an idea pretty quickly, and then you can start to sort of apply that to yourself. So you got something to start with.
Have we ever been in a better time for accessing information?
No, it's so easy. Like it'd be 5 minutes before we finished in this, and I could tell you roughly what people are spending and where not to stay and where to stay. You got one app, basically, can get you around the whole country.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anything else? I think we will have to do a deep dive because I want to hear more about your 12 months, or wasn't 12 months, was it 3 months?
Felt like you want 12 weeks.
Anything else before we close up?
No, I think that's good. Again, we'll just keep hopefully getting these out on a weekly basis and keep it topical for people. So
30 minutes on the knocker.
Bang. Perfect.
Thanks, Ben. Cheers. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at BurkeBrittonFP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.